Some reflections out of time, extempore, on the situation with the personality of Heidegger and how that might, with reason, be thought to affect to some degree the quality of his thought. Well, I must confess that I have almost no patience for the general fussing about which tries to insulate being in time as prior to Heidegger's engagement with the Nazi movement, which is just a bunch of squeamishness, to use Leo Strauss's term. Certainly, Heidegger did differentiate his thinking from his political engagement in the early 30s, but Leo Strauss himself, and also one could say Heidegger's lover, Hannah Arendt, both considered that Heidegger was by no means a Nazi, and I think they would have considered as sort of, I don't know, pathetic dramatic act, this retiring of the president of the Heidegger Society over the contents of the black notebooks and so forth. As I mentioned before, Leo Strauss says just look at the dedication to Paul Natorp in the Sophist book, and then you see Heidegger's deep and anxiously concerned care for his fellows, who he thought must seek inner responsibility for their fate. And that was his reason for trying to make an intervention into the newly elected regime in the opening of the Hitler site. I think that's totally adequate. Just read that dedication to the Sophist book. So in connection to Heidegger as a thinker rather than Heidegger as a political actor or a thinker, we have the problem of the qualification of his personality. So this is seen from Heidegger's own perspective. This is an issue of Aristotelian focus of the logos according to a certain tendency, which is seeing things according to a personality. So we have this sense in which the apophantic logos, the logos as that which shows some phenomena, the logos as that which focuses us in on a subject matter, tells us here's the subject matter, personality. So this is the big subject matter for Carl Jung. Carl Jung has said Heidegger is banal as hell. Carl Jung, who had some animus towards Heidegger, Carl Jung, who himself was accused of being the quote-unquote Aryan Christ. In other words, a modified form of Christ, not Christ as Christ of all sentient beings, as Kant would have it, or of all human beings, as the ordinary vernacular would have it, but Christ of the Aryans, a German-speaking Christ, even though Carl Jung was Swiss, but German-speaking Swiss, with some dialect. In other words, the Swiss has some differences from German, just as Austrian has some differences from German. But that's just like this in the South. People say you want a sack with that, meaning you want a bag with that when you buy something in a store, something like that, or a polecat rather than a skunk or something. There's some differences in dialect, but not that big a difference in terms of the grammar, in terms of the basic structure of the language. Um, so let me use an anecdote to approach this issue. Uh, Gadamer, a confrere of Heidegger, sort of genuine confrere of Heidegger, very close to Heidegger, reports the incident that the Gasset philosopher, um, who Heidegger was in a way intimidated by his personal presence, um, says to Heidegger, or in the presence of Heidegger when they were all standing together, Heidegger doesn't know how to dance. He doesn't dance with philosophy. And Heidegger mutters under his breath, I really don't know what dancing has to do with philosophy. So this is obviously pointing us to Nietzsche. You know, Nietzsche says, you must be like the dancing star, the shooting star, the streak of lightning that describes the path across the vault of the heavens, dancing star, which one is supposed to make a wish upon. Heidegger is apparently, according to the Gasset, too much of put in Jungian terms, too much of a rational type. So the rational types include, for Jung, both the feeling type, which makes distinction between this thing is acceptable or non-acceptable, especially in context of social context. Sometimes you don't say the truth from the point of view of, let's say, Plato, because you want to establish a nice atmosphere for social reasons. You're at a banquet, you don't want to bring up politics and religion at the banquet, and if it is brought up, you smooth it over. The feeling type is a rational type in the sense that it takes cognizance of this issue and it weighs and it says, this is to be accepted, this is not to be accepted. Heidegger has something, my claim is Heidegger has something of that in his basic makeup, the feeling type. The other rational type is the thinking type, which doesn't take that into account, but rather always asks, what is the thing? What is it? It's like Heidegger's Thing book is sort of the anti-Heidegger book in the way that it's just saying, what is it? We don't care if we like it or don't like it, but what is it? That's what the thinking type does. Nietzsche's the sort of the extremity at the limit. That's the thinking type is Friedrich Nietzsche. The other types, according to Jung, are the sensation type, which is probably more like Ortega de Gasset himself, sort of overbearing type of guy, like the I think a little bit like the guy that played Perry Mason would be an example of that, or something in the direction of maybe the guy that played Darth Vader, or the voice of Darth Vader, something in that direction. And then the other one, these are the two irrational types. The other one is the so-called intuition type, which sort of envisages the future physically before themselves. It pops up before themselves. Here's the future, and I can kind of choose between. I think I would say Kristen Stewart is something of a intuition type, introverted intuition type. An example of that in philosophy is not immediately clear to me. It's almost like that type doesn't go into philosophy. So in a certain sense, Heidegger, in this bias, realizes his own bias, and then he says, that's the problem with the metaphysics, that's the problem with philosophy. It doesn't cover reality as a whole, but it tries to stay within the rational types, it tries to stay within reason. Man is the reasonable animal. It tries to stay within the grasp of reflection, reflective reason. So, for instance, Carl Jung produces the phrase that which goes beyond critical reason. And by this, he points to the mystical, which is to say, the total absence of any skepticism, the mystical um, mindset, let's say, call it. And also, in a certain sense, the philosopher is always, aside from being set against, from the point of view of philosophy, philosophy is set against poetry. So that's Zizek. You can listen to Zizek about that. You heard a lot about philosophy against poetry, and there's no war without a poet for the war. And he gives many fantastical and very quote unquote interesting examples, but genuinely interesting examples, like these guys from the these war criminals who escaped and then assumed second identities and wrote beautiful poems and things of that nature. But aside from that, we have this issue of the contrast between the philosopher and the political man, where the political man is the man of action. So, in some sense, I wonder if, properly speaking, the man of action can be connected to, in some way, to the introverted intuition type. So, Hitler, for instance, is introverted intuition type. I would almost venture to assert that's a questionable. That's questionable, but if you read the Diagnosing the Dictators, and you see Mussolini set off Mussolini as the strong man, who is a strong man in as a public figure, but you can see that in personal life he probably wasn't that much of a strong man. Whereas